The marketplace on the far edge of the human colony was filled with strange sounds that morning. The air buzzed with engines, the chatter of traders, and the metallic voice of the auctioneer calling out prices. Elias Ward stood near the back of the crowd, hands deep in his coat pockets, watching quietly. He wasn't a rich man, just a small mechanic who fixed broken drones and farming tools for the settlers. He hadn't come to buy anything special that day. He only wanted to look around and maybe find some used machine parts for his workshop. But this auction was different. It wasn't about machines, it was about beings, workers, helpers, and travelers from other worlds who had lost their way after the border wars. Some were refugees. Some were sold as servants for food and shelter. Elias didn't like it, but in the colonies, life was harsh. Everyone did what they had to in order to survive. He leaned against a post as the auctioneer shouted, "Next, a female, unregistered origin, silent since capture," the crowd murmured. A young alien girl was brought forward by two guards. She walked slowly, her hands tied loosely in front of her, eyes lowered. Her skin was a pale silver tone that reflected the sunlight like metal, and her dark hair hung over her shoulders in soft waves. She wasn't tall, maybe a little shorter than a human woman, but her presence made everyone quiet. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't react to the auctioneer's voice or the crowd's whispers. She simply stood there, calm, silent, and distant, as if her mind was somewhere else far beyond the colony's dusty ground. The auctioneer grew impatient. No response, doesn't talk, doesn't eat, doesn't even look up. But she's alive and healthy. Starting bid, 20 credits. No one raised a hand. People exchanged glances and shook their heads. "She's broken," someone muttered. "Useless," said another. "Curse thing," another whispered. Elias watched quietly. Something about her silence made him uneasy, but also curious. He could sense there was more behind those still eyes than people saw. He didn't know why, but he felt sorry for her. Maybe she was frightened. Maybe she just didn't understand what was happening. The auctioneer sighed loudly. 10 credits then. Come on, folks. She's still breathing. Someone take her." Still, no one moved. Elias hesitated. He didn't need a helper. He barely earned enough for himself. But something inside him pushed him forward. He remembered how he once found a damaged service robot thrown away behind a scrapyard. Everyone thought it was useless. But after weeks of fixing it, the machine started working again. He had a soft spot for things, beings, that others gave up on. He raised his hand slowly. 5 credits, he said, almost to himself. The crowd turned to look at him. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. 5 credits? You serious, sir? Elias nodded once. The auctioneer laughed and slammed the metal gavel. Sold, to the mechanic with the soft heart. People laughed, but Elias ignored them. He paid the credits and walked toward the platform. The girl stood motionless as the guards untied her. Up close he could see her more clearly. Her eyes were a soft shade of silver blue, almost like water under moonlight. She didn't blink much, and she didn't flinch when he approached. "It's all right," Elias said softly. "You're free now. You can come with me." She said nothing. She simply followed him quietly as he led her away from the market. They walked through the dusty streets toward the small shed that Elias called home. It wasn't much. Just a small metal cabin with a workshop attached, filled with tools, wires, and spare parts. His old robot helper beeped in surprise when they entered. Elias guided her to a chair and offered her water. "Here, you must be thirsty." She looked at the cup but didn't move. Her expression didn't change at all. He sighed gently and set the cup on the table beside her. He tried again, speaking softly as if talking to a child. "I'm Elias. You don't have to be afraid. I won't hurt you." Still no answer. She sat there staring at the wall, silent as stone. As the evening came, Elias made a small meal for himself and placed a plate near her. She didn't touch it. He watched her for a while, wondering who she really was. Her clothes were torn and covered in dust, but beneath the dirt, the fabric looked strange, smooth and shining, like it wasn't made on Earth or any colony he knew. He worked late that night, fixing a broken drone engine while she sat in the corner quietly. Every now and then he glanced at her. Her eyes weren't empty, they were full of something deep, something she couldn't say. When he finished, he leaned back and wiped his hands. "Guess you're not much of a talker," he said softly, half smiling. He expected no answer, and she gave none. But as he turned off the lamp, he noticed her eyes move slightly toward the window. Outside, the sky was full of stars. She stared at them as if they were calling her name. Elias followed her gaze and wondered what she saw out there, what kind of world she had come from and what had made her so quiet. Later, as he lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. The silence felt heavy, not peaceful. There was something strange about it, like the calm before a storm. He turned to look at her again. She had fallen asleep sitting by the window, her head resting on her knees, her silver blue eyes closed. Elias whispered to himself, "What have I gotten myself into?" He smiled faintly and pulled a blanket over her shoulders before turning out the light. Outside, the wind howled softly across the dry land. The stars above flickered like distant fires. And in that quiet, a faint hum filled the air, so soft that only she could hear it. She opened her eyes again for a moment, looking at the stars through the cracked glass. Something far away was moving in that darkness, coming closer. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Then she closed her eyes once more, pretending to sleep. Elias had no idea that the girl he had bought for almost nothing would soon change his life forever. The next few days passed quietly in Elias Ward's small metal cabin. The alien girl he had brought home still hadn't said a word. She followed him wherever he went. Never too close, never too far. She didn't show fear or anger, just silence, like her voice was locked away deep inside her. Elias tried to talk to her every day. "You feeling better?" he would ask in the morning. "Want to help me fix the drone today?" But she would only look at him for a second, then glance away, her face calm and unreadable. Sometimes she would point at something in his workshop, as if curious, but she never spoke. He named her Lyra, a name he picked from an old story about a star traveler. "You need a name," he said with a smile. "I can't just keep calling you girl. How about Lyra? It means light." For a moment she looked at him as if she understood. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Elias nodded anyway. "All right, Lyra, it is." Life went on. In the mornings, Elias worked on broken farming drones. In the evenings, he repaired old water filters or mechanical arms for miners. Lyra watched quietly from the corner or sat by the window, staring at the horizon. Sometimes she helped without being asked, handing him tools at the right moment, organizing parts or touching a broken machine. At first, Elias thought it was just coincidence, but soon he noticed something strange. When she touched a damaged part, it would stop sparking. When she placed her hand on a cracked metal plate, the static current would fade. Her touch seemed to calm machines the way gentle hands calm frightened animals. One evening, Elias was fixing a power converter when it started sparking badly. "Ah, come on," he muttered, leaning closer. The blue light flashed dangerously. Before he could pull away, Lyra stepped forward and laid her slender hand on the converter. The light flickered, then faded completely. Elias blinked in surprise. "How did you do that?" Lyra looked at her hand for a moment, then slowly pulled it back. She gave no answer, but her eyes, those silver blue eyes, seemed to say she didn't know either, or maybe didn't want to explain. Elias rubbed his neck, amazed. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" That night, while he cooked a small meal, he noticed Lyra standing outside again. The sky above was filled with stars, glowing faintly through the thin atmosphere. She stood motionless, her face turned upward, her hair moving gently in the wind. Elias opened the door quietly and stepped out. "You like the stars, huh?" he said softly. She didn't answer, but her eyes stayed on the sky. "I used to watch them too," he continued. "When I was a kid, I thought every star was a home. My father said people like us would never go that far." He chuckled lightly. Guess he was wrong. Now humans live on half of them. Lyra finally turned her head toward him. There was something sad in her eyes. For the first time, Elias felt she wasn't just quiet. She was carrying something heavy inside her, something she couldn't share. "You miss your home, don't you?" he asked, her eyes softened. She didn't nod or speak, but he knew the answer. They stood there in silence, the wind brushing past them, Far away, a mining ship rose into the night sky, its lights flickering like a moving star. Lyra watched until it disappeared into the dark clouds. Elias sighed. Don't worry. You're safe here. Whatever happened before, it's over now. But deep down, he wasn't sure if that was true. That night, something strange happened again. Elias woke to a faint humming sound. At first, he thought it was one of his machines running in the workshop, but the sound was different, softer, almost like singing. He got up quietly and followed the noise. It came from Lyra's room. The door was slightly open. Inside, she was standing near the window again, her hand pressed against the glass. A pale light glowed faintly under her skin, traveling along her arm like moving water. Her eyes shone with the same soft light. Elias froze. He didn't want to scare her. The hum grew louder for a moment, then faded as she lowered her hand. The light disappeared completely, and she stood still, breathing softly. He stepped back silently and returned to his bed, his mind spinning. What was she? What was that energy? He had heard stories of alien technology merging with living beings, but never like this. And yet she didn't seem dangerous, only lost. The next morning, he said nothing about what he had seen. He made breakfast as usual and watched her quietly. She still didn't speak or eat much, just looked out the window, always toward the same direction, the mountains beyond the colony. Is there something out there? He asked, curious. Something you're waiting for? She turned her head slightly but didn't answer. Her eyes were calm, but there was a flicker of fear in them this time. That evening, as Elias worked, the lights in his workshop suddenly dimmed and then brightened again. Power surge? He muttered. He checked the cables, nothing was wrong. Then he noticed Lyra standing in the doorway, her hands trembling slightly. Hey, you all right? He asked, walking closer. She shook her head quickly and took a step back. Her breathing was fast, her eyes darting to the sky through the window again. Elias frowned. Is something happening? She didn't move. Then after a long moment, she raised her hand and pointed upward. Elias followed her finger. The sky looked normal, just stars and drifting clouds. But for a second, just a second, he thought he saw a faint light flash far beyond the atmosphere, like something moving silently above the colony. He rubbed his eyes. Probably a transport ship, he said, trying to sound calm. But Lyra's face said otherwise. Her expression had changed, her eyes full of quiet panic, her lips pressing together as if holding back words. Later that night, she sat near the old radio console in the workshop. The static crackled softly, picking up faint signals from faraway places. She touched one of the broken wires, and for a brief moment the static cleared. A strange voice, not human, whispered through the speaker, a series of soft tones and clicks. Elias froze. What was that? But before he could ask more, Lyra pulled her hand back. The radio went silent again. She stood up and walked away, her face unreadable. That night, Elias couldn't sleep again. He looked at the ceiling, his mind filled with questions. Who was she really? What was she afraid of? And why did she keep looking at the sky like she was waiting for someone or something? He didn't know the answers. But one thing was clear. The girl he had bought for almost nothing wasn't just an ordinary being. She was connected to something far greater, and maybe far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Outside, in the cold night sky, the faint light moved again. But this time it didn't vanish. It seemed to be getting closer. The seventh night was colder than usual. The wind outside carried fine dust from the canyon and whispered through the cracks of Elias's old cabin. The small heater in the corner flickered weakly, and Elias sat beside it working on a broken power cell. Lyra was sitting near the window again, her eyes fixed on the dark sky as always. The silence between them was familiar now. He didn't mind it anymore. Sometimes he even found peace in it. It was like having quiet company, someone who didn't need words to understand, but that night something felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, like the world itself was holding its breath. Elias wiped his hands and looked over at her. "You're not sleeping again?" he asked softly. She didn't respond. Her eyes were wide, her body still as stone. He frowned and stood up. "Lyra?" That was when she turned her head toward him, and he froze. Her face was pale, almost glowing under the dim light, and her eyes shimmered faintly with a silver light he had never seen before. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Elias took a cautious step closer. "What's wrong?" Suddenly, she stood up and rushed toward him. It was the first time she had ever moved so fast. She grabbed his arm tightly, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. Her eyes were wide with fear, her breath quick and shaky. Hey, calm down, Elias said, startled. What is it? What's happening? She pointed to the ceiling, then to the window. Elias turned and looked outside. The stars were still there, but one of them was moving. A small, distant light glided silently across the sky. Then another appeared beside it. And another. Within seconds, a cluster of lights spread over the horizon, moving in formation. He felt his stomach twist. Those aren't transport ships, he whispered. Lyra let go of his arm and backed away, shaking her head rapidly. Her breathing grew louder, more panicked. Then, without warning, she spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but full of terror. One word escaped her lips, broken, trembling, but clear. Run. Elias's heart pounded. For days she hadn't said a single word, and now she was screaming one that made his blood turn cold. Run? He repeated in disbelief. From what? Before she could answer, the ground trembled beneath them. The tools on the workbench rattled, and the power flickered out completely. The hum of engines filled the air, deep and rhythmic, not human-made. Outside, a red glow spread across the clouds as something huge passed overhead. Lyra grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the door. Run! She shouted again, her voice breaking this time, but louder, stronger. Elias didn't argue. They ran out into the open night. The wind was sharp, carrying dust and the faint echo of machinery. Over the horizon, a massive ship descended silently, its dark surface gleaming under the twin moons. It made no sound except for the steady vibration that pulsed through the ground. What are they? Elias shouted as they ran. Lyra didn't answer. She only looked up once, and the light from the ship reflected in her eyes like lightning. She tugged him toward the canyon trail that led away from the colony. Her bare feet hit the rocky ground, but she didn't slow down. Behind them, lights began to scan the ground, thin beams of blue energy sweeping across the desert. When one beam passed over an abandoned shed, the entire structure disintegrated in a flash. Elias gasped. They're searching for something. Lyra turned her head toward him and shook her head fiercely. For me, she said in a broken whisper. He stumbled. You, why? But before she could respond, a small drone zipped over the ridge. It was black and silent, with red sensors glowing on its surface. Lyra stopped suddenly, her eyes narrowing. She reached out with one hand, and the drone froze mid-air. Elias stared in disbelief. Her hand trembled as the drone began to spark, its lights flickering before it fell to the ground, lifeless. She swayed slightly, exhausted, but didn't stop. More coming, she whispered urgently. They ran again, their shadows long and thin under the red light from the ships above. Elias's lungs burned as they reached the narrow canyon entrance. He could hear the hum of more drones behind them. Lyra grabbed his sleeve and pulled him into a side tunnel, hidden behind a cluster of rocks. Inside the darkness, the air was cold and still. Elias could barely catch his breath. Lyra, he whispered, tell me what's happening. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself. Her voice was quiet now, trembling. They found me. I thought they wouldn't, but they did. Who? She looked up at him, her silver blue eyes full of fear. Not my people. The ones who made me run. The ones who made me silent. Elias didn't understand, but he could see she was terrified. Are they dangerous? She nodded slowly. They don't want me to speak. They don't want me alive. He swallowed hard, realizing how serious it was. Then we need to get as far away from here as we can. Outside, the ground shook again. A deep rumbling sound rolled through the night. The sky flashed with blue light as more drones fanned out across the desert, scanning everything in their path. Elias peeked through the cracks in the rocks. The ships above were moving lower now, their lights cutting through the clouds. For a moment, he thought he saw figures descending, tall shapes with metallic armor, moving with silent precision. He turned to Lyra. We can't stay here. They'll find us, Lyra nodded weakly. There's a place, she said softly. A shelter. Old tunnels. I remember. Elias helped her stand. They moved deeper into the canyon, following a narrow path that wound between sharp rocks. The sound of drones echoed behind them, closer and closer. At one point, a beam of blue light swept across the canyon floor, barely missing them. Elias threw himself against the wall, covering Lyra with his body. The heat from the beam passed inches from his shoulder, leaving a faint mark on the stone. When it was gone, Lyra whispered shakily, "Thank you." He looked at her. "You saved me first." They continued through the darkness until the noise faded behind them. When they finally stopped to rest, Lyra sank to her knees, exhausted. Elias crouched beside her. "Lyra," he said gently, "why did you scream run? What are they trying to stop you from saying?" Her voice was almost a whisper. "Because if I speak the truth, everything changes." Elias didn't understand, but her tone sent a chill down his spine. She looked up at him. Her eyes filled with something more than fear, something like guilt. "You shouldn't have bought me, Elias. They'll come for you too now." He shook his head firmly. "Doesn't matter. We'll get through this together." Far above them, the night sky glowed faintly again as the ships moved in formation, searching, hunting. Lyra closed her eyes, pressing her hand to her chest. The faint humming returned, the same soft sound Elias had heard nights before. It grew stronger, pulsing through the tunnel walls like a heartbeat. "Lyra," he whispered, watching in awe. "What are you doing?" "Listening," she said quietly. "They're calling me, but I won't answer." Outside, the wind rose, carrying dust and the distant hum of engines. The chase was far from over. But for the first time, Elias realized something powerful. Lyra wasn't just running from them. She was running toward something too, something she hadn't yet told him, and he knew her one word, run, had only saved his life for now. The real danger was still coming. The night had turned into a long, endless escape through the canyon tunnels. The wind outside carried the roar of distant engines, but inside the stone paths there was only the sound of their footsteps and the faint hum of Lyra's breathing. Elias led the way with a small flashlight from his tool belt. Its light shook with every step he took, casting shadows on the rough walls that looked like moving figures in the dark. Lyra walked close behind him, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She didn't seem tired even after hours of running. Her steps were light and steady, like she knew exactly where to go. Elias, on the other hand, was struggling. His legs ached, his throat was dry, and every breath burned his chest. They finally reached a wider area where the tunnel opened into a small underground chamber. There was a pool of still water in the middle, reflecting their tired faces. Elias dropped his bag on the ground and sat down heavily. "We should rest here," he said between breaths. "Just for a bit." Lyra nodded silently and sat a few feet away. The dim light made her features soft but mysterious, the pale glow of her skin, the way her eyes reflected the faint light, the calm expression that somehow carried sadness. Elias broke the silence after a while. "You said they don't want you alive. Who are they, Lyra?" She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze dropped to the water and her reflection rippled gently. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "They're not my people. They're something worse. They call themselves the Order. They come from my world, but they don't believe in peace. They believe in control." Elias frowned. "Control?" She nodded. "They think the universe can only survive if everything follows their design. They use science, power, and fear to make it happen. When I was with them, I worked as a researcher, a scientist studying how human and alien life could work together." Elias leaned forward, listening carefully. "At first I believed in it," she continued softly. "We wanted to find a way to understand humans, to learn from them. But the project changed. The leaders began testing, things they shouldn't have. They wanted to make soldiers, half human, half my kind. When I found out what they were doing, I ran." Her voice broke a little at the end, and Elias could see her hands trembling slightly. "So they're hunting you because you know their secret?" She nodded. "Yes, I escaped with proof. It's inside me, my memory, my thoughts, everything I saw. That's why they can't let me live." Elias stared at her, stunned. The silent girl he had bought for almost nothing wasn't a lost servant. She was someone carrying the truth of an entire hidden war. He looked down at the dusty ground, thinking, "So when you stopped that drone back there, that was part of what they made you do?" Her eyes lowered. "They changed my body to control machines. I never wanted it, but now it's part of me." Elias sighed. "You're not a weapon, Lyra." She looked at him with a faint smile. "You don't know how many times I wished someone would say that." For a moment, silence returned. The only sound was the gentle drip of water from the rocks above. Then suddenly a faint vibration echoed through the tunnel. Elias froze and looked up. "Do you hear that?" Lyra nodded slowly. Her eyes flashed brighter for a second. "They're scanning again. They're getting closer. Elias quickly packed his tools. Then we move. They started deeper into the tunnels, following a narrow path that twisted downward. The air grew colder and the ground turned damp. Strange markings covered the walls, symbols Elias didn't recognize. What are those? He asked quietly. Lyra ran her hand across the stone. Old tunnels. My people used to travel through these long before humans came here. We built them to hide from the storms. Now they hide us again. The tunnel grew darker until Elias's flashlight began to dim. Suddenly, Lyra reached out and touched the wall, and a soft white glow spread from her fingers, lighting up the space around them. Elias stared in awe. You can do that too? It's not light, she said softly. It's memory. The walls remember energy. I just wake it up. They walked on under the pale glow until they reached another wide space, an ancient underground chamber filled with old machines half buried in rock. They looked like strange metal trees with long roots spreading across the floor. Elias approached one of them, brushing off the dust. What are these? Communication towers, Lyra said quietly. From my world. They're sleeping now, but if we wake them, I can send a message. A message? She nodded. To warn the humans. If the order reaches your colonies, they'll take everything. They'll use the same experiments again. Elias felt a chill. Then let's do it. How do we start? Lyra knelt by one of the metal roots and placed her hands on it. Her eyes glowed brighter than before. The air filled with a low hum that grew stronger until small sparks of light danced along the metal lines. The whole chamber came alive, glowing like a web of stars. Elias shielded his eyes. Lyra, is this safe? She didn't answer. Her face was calm, her focus deep. The lights pulsed faster, the hum turning into a steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. Then suddenly the ground shook. Elias grabbed a wall to steady himself. What's happening? Lyra opened her eyes, now shining completely silver. They found the signal. Outside the tunnels, the night exploded with light. The ships had found them. Elias heard the distant sound of rocks breaking and engines roaring above. Dust fell from the ceiling and small stones rolled down the walls. We have to go, he shouted. Lyra's hands glowed brighter. Just a little longer. The machines released a beam of blue light upward through the cracks in the ceiling. The entire cavern trembled. Then the hum stopped. The glow faded, leaving only the sound of falling dust. Lyra stood weakly, her breathing uneven. It's done, she whispered. They'll know now. Someone will come. Elias hurried to her side. Can you walk? She nodded faintly. Yes, but they're already here. The sound of drones echoed again, closer this time. Elias grabbed her hand. Then we keep moving. They ran through another tunnel that sloped upward toward the surface. The air grew warmer as they neared the exit. Behind them, faint red lights glimmered in the darkness, drones scanning the paths they had left behind. Lyra stumbled once, and Elias caught her. Don't stop, he said firmly. I'm all right, she whispered, forcing a smile. You shouldn't have helped me, Elias. Now they'll hunt you too. He shook his head. Then they'll have to catch us both. They reached the surface again just as dawn began to rise. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the barren land, turning the sand into gold. The colony was far behind them now, just a faint outline in the distance. Lyra turned her face toward the light, her eyes soft. It's beautiful, she whispered. I almost forgot how it looked. Elias smiled faintly, even as the wind whipped dust around them. We made it through the night, he said. That's something. Lyra nodded, though her expression grew serious again. The message was sent, but the order won't stop. They'll come faster now. Elias looked toward the horizon. Then we'll keep running until someone listens. As the sun climbed higher, they started walking across the endless plain. Two figures alone in a quiet world that was no longer safe, but not without hope. And somewhere deep underground, the old machine still pulsed faintly with Lyra's light, sending her message across the stars. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the desert sky with shades of gold and red. Elias and Lyra walked side by side across the endless plain, leaving behind the tunnels and the danger that had almost trapped them forever. The cool morning air felt like a small gift after a long night of fear and running. For a while they didn't speak. Their footsteps were the only sound, crunching softly against the sand. Lyra's face looked calm again, but her eyes showed exhaustion. Her silver marks, once glowing brightly, were now faint and dull. Elias noticed it and frowned. You're getting weaker, he said quietly. I'll be fine, she answered with a tired smile. I just need to rest. Elias stopped walking. We've been running all night. You need food, water, something? She looked at him, surprised by his concern. You shouldn't worry about me. You've already risked too much. Elias shook his head. Maybe, but I'm not leaving you behind. Not after everything we've been through. They found a broken cargo shelter nearby, an old structure half buried in sand. Inside there were dusty crates, some old tools, and a water tank still half full. Elias filled a small metal cup and handed it to her. She drank slowly, her hands trembling slightly. He sat down beside her. So, the message you sent. Do you think anyone received it? Lyra looked toward the sky. If the towers worked, then yes. Someone out there heard it. Maybe the human colonies, maybe others from my world who still believe in peace. Elias leaned back, thinking. And if they didn't? Then, she said softly, we keep running until we find someone who will listen. The wind howled outside, carrying sand across the shelter door. Elias looked at her again. You said your people used to travel through these lands before humans came. Do you think they'll come back? She nodded slowly. Maybe. The universe is big, but messages find their way home. They always do. A sudden noise outside interrupted them. Elias stood up quickly and peered through a crack in the wall. Far in the distance, small black dots were moving fast through the sky. Ships. They found us again, he whispered. Lyra stood too, her eyes narrowing. No, look closer. Elias adjusted the small scanner on his wrist. The reading flashed green instead of red. These aren't from the Order, he said in surprise. They're human ships. Lyra's face lit up with hope. Then they received the message. Moments later, the ships descended, landing in a wide circle around them. Dust swirled as the engines cooled. From the largest one, a group of humans in silver suits stepped out. Their leader, a tall woman with short dark hair, approached cautiously, scanning the area. Elias raised his hand slightly. We're not enemies, he called out. She's with me. The leader's eyes moved from Elias to Lyra. We received a strange transmission, she said slowly. Coordinates, warnings, and images we don't understand. Was that you? Lyra stepped forward. Yes, my name is Lyra. I came from a world your maps don't show. The Order wants to destroy both our kinds. They'll come soon. The leader frowned but didn't lower her weapon. You're saying an alien military is planning to invade human colonies? Yes, Lyra said firmly. And I can prove it. But we don't have much time, Elias spoke up. She's telling the truth. I've seen their drones. I've seen how far they'll go to silence her. The leader hesitated, then finally nodded. All right. We'll take you both to the base. You can tell us everything there. Hours later, they were on the ship flying above the desert. Through the window, Elias could see the land stretching endlessly below them. Lyra sat quietly across from him, her hands folded on her lap. The light from the ship reflected off her eyes, making them look like small stars. You did it, Elias said softly. You actually got their attention. She smiled faintly. No, we did it. If you hadn't helped me, I would have never made it this far. Elias looked down at his hands. I didn't do much. You believed me, she replied. Sometimes that's more than enough. When the ship reached the human base, they were taken to a clean, bright chamber filled with monitors and holograms. Scientists and officers gathered around as Lyra explained everything. How the Order had turned her people into tools, how they were building hybrid soldiers, and how she escaped to warn humanity. At first, the humans looked skeptical, but when she activated the small crystal memory from her suit, the holograms came alive. They showed images of massive alien ships, cloning facilities, and dark laboratories where experiments were done on both alien and human DNA. The room fell silent. The leader of the base turned to her. This is unbelievable, but if it's true, we have to prepare. It's true, Lyra said quietly. They'll come soon. You have maybe a few days before they reach this world. Elias clenched his fists. Then we need to fight, the leader nodded. We will, but we'll also protect you both. You brought us the warning we needed. Lyra looked relieved, but also worried. I don't want war, she whispered. I just want peace between our kinds. Elias placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Maybe this time peace starts with us. That night from the base's tower, Elias stood looking at the stars. Ships were being prepared, Soldiers trained below. The world was no longer quiet, but it was alive with purpose. Lyra joined him, standing silently beside him. "You miss your home," he said. She nodded slowly. "Yes, but maybe this world can be a new home too." He turned to her. "After all this, what will you do?" "I'll help them build defenses," she said softly. "And when the time comes, I'll face the Order. I know how they think. Maybe I can stop them without more fighting." Elias smiled. "You really believe that?" She looked up at the night sky. "Hope is all I have left." The stars shimmered above them, bright and endless. Somewhere out there, enemies were coming, but for now, there was peace between two lives that should never have met. As the night deepened, the first signals arrived from orbit, proof that the Order's fleet was on its way. Sirens rang across the base. Soldiers ran to their stations. Elias turned to Lyra. "Looks like it's time." She nodded. "Time to stand together." When the fleet finally appeared in the sky, humans and aliens didn't run. They faced it side by side. And for the first time, two worlds that had feared each other stood as one. The battle that followed would become a story told for generations, not just about war, but about faith, courage, and a bond that began with one act of kindness in a broken world. Elias had saved an alien girl once, but in truth she had saved him too, by reminding him that hope, no matter how small, can change the fate of an entire world. And as the first lights of the new dawn spread across the sky, humanity responded not with fear but with unity.